The Razee Saga. Part 19. Wrath of the Kin. The first seams opened like wounds in the dark above the Dominion border world of Veros. A dozen tears at once, their edges jagged, shimmering with the pale silence of the abyss. And from them spilled the shadows of listener ships, vessels as black as void, bristling with stolen weapons that glowed in sickly patterns. The alarm nets screamed across the system, calling fleets to war. Razee 2 folded first, her hull shimmering from the resonance fields woven into her plating. Scuda V and Arclight slid from the rift in formation, Aegis following close behind with shields already raised. And then came the shape that dwarfed them all. Brother, its massive frame pulsing faintly with golden glyphs, its presence filling the void like a second star. Steven stood on the command rail of the Razee 2, one hand clutching the edge as his mark burned hot against his arm. He could feel Sentinel humming within him, the living world stirring in rhythm with its sibling. Every seam ripped open above Veros bled into his mind. The abyss screamed, but so did something deeper, older, louder. Rivers stood beside him, eyes locked on the hollow projection of the battle. Seams widening, halo net faltering, Dominion frigates already breaking under the silence beams. His voice was iron. Steven. No. Steven nodded, his breath ragged. He reached outward, not with his hands but with the mark. He felt Sentinel, the pulse rising from its core, flowing through him like molten fire. He opened himself to Brother, let the current surge outward. The void erupted. Brother pulsed once, glyphs blazing like rivers of molten gold across its titanic frame. The resonance struck outward, a shockwave of sound and lightning that rippled across the seams. 10 seams snapped shut in an instant, their wounds seared closed. Listener vessels caught within the blast convulsed, their hulls splintering, silence shattered by thunder. The battlefield froze in awe. Dominion captains gasped. Aegis crews stared wide-eyed. Even the veterans of Gemini fleet whispered in disbelief. In a single pulse, Brother had unleashed destruction greater than anything they had wielded before. But Steven collapsed. His knees buckled, his body seizing as if struck by lightning. Rivers caught him before he hit the deck, lowering him gently. Steven's face was pale, his veins glowing faint beneath his skin as the last echoes of Sentinel's surge faded. His breath came in shallow gasps. Steven. Rivers barked. Stay with me. Steven coughed, his voice hoarse, eyes glazed with exhaustion. It's too much. Sentinel's surge. Brother's channel. It nearly burned me alive. Rivers' jaw tightened, fury etched in his voice. You can't keep doing this. It'll kill you. Steven's hand gripped Rivers' arm weakly, his words strained but certain. Then don't make me. You stevebot. That's why you had the doctors build it. Sentinel doesn't care if the conduit is flesh or alloy. It cares about blood. As long as my blood runs through its veins, it can stand in for me. It can take the surge. Not me. Rivers' eyes narrowed, but the logic cut clean. He hated it, hated the thought of pushing that burden onto the construct. But Steven was right. His friend's body was too frail for this storm. Steven's grip loosened, his eyes fluttering closed. Next time, let it be stevebot. Rivers turned to Vines. Get him to medbay. No. And don't leave his side. Vines saluted sharply, already signaling for the med team. Hours later, the council chamber on Sentinel blazed with light and voices. Reports of the Veros battle streamed in. Dominion fleets had survived, but only because of Brother's wrath pulse. The hollow displayed the aftermath. Seams closed, listener wreckage adrift, Brother glowing faintly as its power subsided. But awe quickly soured into fear. Dominion envoys shouted across the chamber, their voices sharp and accusing. That thing is too powerful to be left unchecked. It belongs to the Dominion, not the Alliance. It was found in our territory. You've seen what it can do. One pulse and it wipes out fleets. How long until it turns on us? Rivers stood at the far side of the chamber, arms folded, jaw locked. He had expected this. Power never came without fear. Hope slammed a hand against the table, his voice booming like thunder. You fools saw it fight for you. Without it, Veros would be ash. You would be dead. And still you bicker like children. The chamber roared back, Dominion voices rising, Alliance envoys shouting in protest. The debate spiraled, fear and ambition colliding louder with each breath. And then Stephen laughed. He had been sitting quietly at the far edge of the chamber, pale but upright, a med patch still across his arm. His laugh rang sharp, cutting through the clamor, drawing every eye. His mark glowed faintly beneath the sleeve, pulsing in rhythm with brother across the stars. The room froze. Stephen rose, his smile faint but unsettling in its confidence. You're all arguing over the wrong thing. Brother doesn't belong to the Dominion. It doesn't belong to the Alliance. It belongs to Sentinel. And do you know what Sentinel told me when that pulse was unleashed? The silence was heavy, every ear straining. Stephen's eyes gleamed, his voice carrying strong. It told me the abyss felt fear. For the first time the listeners recoiled. For the first time they were not the hunters, they were the prey. Gasps rippled across the chamber. But fear is a double-edged blade, Stephen continued. If they fear us, they will strike harder, faster, with everything they have. That wrath pulse was not the end. It was the beginning. The chamber stirred, voices uncertain. Some awed, others skeptical, still others afraid. The Dominion envoy sneered. And we're supposed to trust the word of a man haunted by visions? Stephen's mark flared bright, golden light spilling across his arm. His voice thundered back, no less fierce than Rivers himself. That mark has kept you alive. Do not mock the thing that spares your world. The envoy faltered, retreating into silence. Rivers stepped forward, his voice steady but sharp. You've all heard him. The abyss felt fear. That means we have struck a wound. But fear will make them desperate. If we fracture now, if we let ambition pull us apart, then we hand them the victory they could never take from us in battle. Hope added, his gaze burning into the Dominion delegation. Unity is survival. Division is death. Choose wisely. But even as he spoke, Rivers saw the hard set in several Dominion faces. They would not yield, not easily. Seeds of fracture had already been sown. The session adjourned in uneasy silence. Groups of envoys whispered in corners as they filed out, their eyes hard, their steps sharp. Rivers remained behind with Hope, both men staring at the fading hollow of brother. They'll break, Hope muttered. I see it in their eyes. They'll split from us. Rivers exhaled slowly, his voice grim. Then they'll learn the same way Veros did. Alone they'll be prey. But united with Sentinel and brother, we'll turn the abyss into the hunted. The forge decks beneath Sentinel's surface glowed with activity. Engineers, Dominion scientists, Illyrian technicians and Cryon power specialists moved in tightly coordinated steps, their voices layered over the steady thrum of reactors. Massive conduits snaked across the chamber like veins, each one humming with latent resonance, each one ready to carry power no human body could withstand. At the center stood stevebot. The construct's frame gleamed under the chamber lights, armored plating lined with glowing conduits of golden fluid. It was not entirely machine nor entirely human. Its veins ran with Stephen's blood, its processors laced with the same markers that bound him to Sentinel's will. Its face was expressionless, metallic, yet eerily familiar in its design. A vessel meant not to replace him but to echo him. Stephen stood nearby, pale but upright, watching with quiet unease. His mark glowed faintly beneath his sleeve, pulsing in rhythm with the thrum of Sentinel's core. He whispered as though to himself, "It feels wrong to see myself standing there, and yet it feels right. If it means I can live a little longer, it's worth it." Rivers stepped up beside him, his hands folded behind his back, his voice steady. "I don't care if it looks right or feels right. What I care about is whether it works. Last time nearly killed you. I won't let that happen again." Stephen gave a faint smile. "Then let's find out." The engineers signaled readiness. Conduits locked into place, linking stevebot to the HaloNet relays deep within Sentinel. The chamber trembled as resonance fields began to rise, their vibrations crawling through every rib of the forge. The construct's eyes lit with golden fire, its chest humming with a low, steady pulse. "Initializing conduit link," one of the Illyrian scientists called out. "Beginning surge transfer in 3, 2, 1. The chamber roared. Sentinel's pulse surged, a wave of raw resonance that poured into the conduits. Stevebot shuddered under the force, its frame rattling, glowing veins blazing brighter. The forge's walls groaned, pressure mounting as though the planet itself held its breath. For a moment it seemed the machine would rupture, fail under the weight of Sentinel's power. Then Brother answered. Across the void, far above Sentinel's orbit, the colossal warship pulsed in reply. Golden glyphs blazed along its frame, humming in rhythm with stevebot's glow. A shockwave rippled outward from the link, bouncing through the halo net, traveling into the stars like a call between kin. Stevebot steadied. The tremors slowed. The glow evened. Its frame no longer fought the current, it carried it. The chief engineer's voice cracked with awe. Conduit stable. Surge held at 100%. Wrath channeling successful. Stephen let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, his knees weak. Rivers only nodded once, his jaw set. Again, Rivers ordered. The scientist hesitated. Admiral, the forge nearly ruptured from the first surge. Again, Rivers repeated, his voice iron. The forge roared a second time. Power surged, louder, brighter, harsher. But Stevebot did not falter. Its veins glowed steady, its core thundering in perfect rhythm with Sentinel's heart. Brother's glyphs flared again in orbit, the resonance singing across the halo net like a song of war. The surge subsided. The chamber stilled. And for the first time they knew, it worked. River stepped forward, eyes locked on the construct. From now on, when Sentinel and Brother unleash their wrath, Stevebot stands as conduit. Stephen lives. The war goes on. Later, Stephen sat in the med bay, a blanket draped around his shoulders, his mark glowing faintly but without strain. Rivers stood at his bedside, arms folded, his face grim. "You've carried this weight too long," Rivers said quietly. "It's breaking you. I won't watch it kill you." Stephen's gaze fell to his hands, trembling faintly. "I know. Every time the surge comes through me, I feel like I'm burning from the inside out. And yet," he looked up, his eyes weary but sharp. "I don't want to let it go. Sentinel chose me. I don't want it to think I've abandoned it." River's voice softened, though his tone was still steel. "You haven't. Stevebot isn't replacing you. It's you, just in another shell. Your blood, your link, your mind when it needs to be. Let it bear the weight. You're still Sentinel's voice. That won't change." Stephen nodded slowly, though the doubt lingered in his eyes. "Then promise me one thing. If the day comes when I can't rise from that bed, you'll let Stevebot be me fully. Not just a stand-in, but me." Rivers didn't answer at first. He hated the thought. But after a long silence, he gave a single nod. "If that day comes, I'll honor it." Word of the trial spread faster than Rivers wanted. By the time the next council session convened, whispers already swirled through the chamber. The Dominion delegation entered with hard stares, their voices sharp before the meeting even began. One of them, a tall envoy clad in ceremonial blue, raised his voice so all could hear. "We have just learned that you have entrusted the power of Brother and Sentinel not to Stephen, but to a machine. A construct, a lifeless vessel of alloy. Do you expect us to trust that?" Murmurs rippled through the chamber, fear and suspicion feeding on one another. The Illyrian scientist present raised a hand, her tone calm but firm. "It is not lifeless. It carries Stephen's blood. It is bound to Sentinel by the same thread as he is. The construct exists only to preserve him, not replace him." But the Dominion envoy pressed, his eyes narrowing. "So we are to believe that this alliance has given the voice of our greatest weapon to a machine? What happens when the construct fails? What happens when it turns against us? You have already hidden shadow fleets. What else are you hiding?" The chamber erupted into shouts. Some demanded transparency. Others demanded Brother be placed fully under Dominion authority. Still others whispered that perhaps the alliance had already lost its way, that perhaps it was time to walk apart. Hope rose, his voice booming. "Enough. You squabble like children while the abyss gathers at your gates. Without Brother, Veros would have fallen. Without Sentinel, you would already be dust. And yet you bicker about ownership like this war is a Game of Thrones. The abyss doesn't care who claims Brother. It only cares how to kill us all." But even his thunder could not silence the fracture. The Dominion was splitting, cracks running deep through its delegation. 3 blocks had already begun to form. One loyal to Rivers and Hope, one demanding Dominion control of Brother, and one whispering of leaving the alliance altogether. Rivers stood, his voice sharp, cutting through the storm. "You think walking away will save you? It won't. The listeners will come for you first because they will know you are weak. They will break you before you can raise your shields. And when they do, don't think they will stop at your borders." The chamber roared with protest, but Rivers did not flinch. He had seen the break coming since Pharaoh's. He knew they would not hold together forever. Stephen sat quietly at the edge of the chamber, his mark glowing faintly. His voice was soft, but it cut through the noise all the same. "Sentinel feels uneasy. The abyss is stirring faster than before. If you leave, you will not survive long enough to regret it." The words silenced the chamber. Not from agreement, but from fear. And yet, as the session ended, groups left with hard faces and whispers on their tongues. The fracture had begun. Rivers and Hope lingered behind, both men staring at the fading hollow of Brother, its massive form pulsing faintly in orbit above Sentinel. Hope muttered, his jaw tight. "They'll leave. You can see it in their eyes. They'll think they can stand alone." Rivers exhaled, his voice grim but steady. "Then let them. When the abyss comes for them, they'll learn the truth. And when they call for help, we'll decide if it's worth answering." Stephen's voice, faint but clear, rose behind them. "You'll answer. You always do." Rivers turned, meeting his weary gaze. He didn't speak, but Stephen was right. He always answered. The Razee 2 drifted in Sentinel's orbit, her hull gleaming with recent refits, scars of past battles patched with new alloy and resonance conduits. Within her hangars, squadrons ran combat drills, while engineers ran their hands over pulse cannon arrays, weaving electrical surge lines into resonance chambers. She was no longer just a flagship, she was a symbol. Rivers stood at the forward command rail, overlooking Gemini fleet arrayed across the void. 150 ships, their formations steady, their crews disciplined. Skuda V loomed at the front of the Warhammer line, her massive prow bristling with resonance cannons and storm batteries. A juggernaut built to smash through silence beams and hold the line no other ship could. Arclight and Isabella II flanked the formation, their shields radiating confidence. Carriers kept to the rear, bays alive with fighters ready to launch at a moment's notice. Every Warhammer, every frigate, every destroyer glowed with new resilience. The fleet had not only been rebuilt since the Watcher War, it had been reborn. Yet even as Rivers watched the formation glitter like a shield of steel, he knew it was not enough. He gestured to the holomap, where additional symbols hovered faintly. 8 Shadow-class vessels, cloaked even from their own allies. 4 Unity fleets, each set of 12 vessels waiting for the order to combine into their paradox forms. And behind them, always waiting, the Lost Fleet, now swollen to nearly 1,000 awakened ships under Isabella's steady hand. Hope entered the chamber quietly, his presence filling the space without words. He stood beside Rivers, eyes fixed on the map. "It's a powerful arm," Hope admitted, his gravelly tone carrying both admiration and unease. "But a powerful arm is nothing without the heart to wield it." Rivers gave a faint nod. "That's why we hold it in reserve. The shadows aren't to be seen until absolutely necessary. The Unity fleets move only when called. Isabella knows to keep the Lost Fleet cloaked until I give the word. If the listeners think they've seen all our strength, they'll only press harder. I want them to keep guessing." Hope grunted approval. "And when the time comes? Then we break them," Rivers said simply. The silence that followed was heavy, not with doubt, but with the certainty of storms yet to come. Later, in the council chamber, the fracture widened into a wound. The Dominion delegation entered with fire in their eyes, their voices sharp before the session even began. Their leader, a tall envoy draped in crimson robes, stepped into the center of the chamber with a sneer of disdain. "We have tolerated this farce long enough," he declared, his voice booming. "Brother is ours. Found in our territory, woken in our presence, tied to our fate. And yet we are asked to share it like common property. No more. From this day we no longer bind ourselves to this fragile alliance." Gasps and shouts rippled through the chamber. The Alliance envoys rose in protest, their voices overlapping. The Illyrian scientist slammed her hand against the table. "You fools. You saw what happened at Pharaoh's. Without Brother you would already be ash." The Dominion envoy's eyes burned with pride and arrogance. "Then we will wield Brother ourselves. Better one strong hand than many weak ones." Hope rose, his voice thunderous, cutting through the storm. "You think you can command Brother? You think it bends to your will alone? Brother chose to fight for us all, not for your crown." But the envoy only sneered. "Perhaps. Or perhaps it has simply not been asked the right way. Rivers stood slowly, his presence commanding silence even among the shouts. His voice was low, steady but sharp as steel. If you leave, you will not last. The abyss will smell weakness and it will come for you first. And when it does, don't think the alliance will bleed itself dry, saving you from your own arrogance. The envoy's lips curled into a smile. We'll take that chance. With a sweep of his cloak, he turned and left the chamber, a third of the Dominion delegation following in his wake. Their banners were lowered, their seats abandoned. The fracture had broken open. The remaining envoys erupted in chaos. Some shouted for unity, others called for caution, still others whispered of following the deserters. The chamber trembled with division. Stephen sat silently at the edge of the room, his mark glowing faintly, his eyes distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but carried across the storm. Sentinel is uneasy. It feels the abyss gathering. Those who leave will not survive long. But even his words could not still the storm. Rivers returned to the Razee 2 with a heaviness in his chest. The bridge was calm, crews running drills, consoles glowing softly. But his mind replayed the scene in the chamber. The arrogance, the pride, the willful blindness. He found Vines waiting in the strategy room, reports in hand. They've already begun moving, Vines said grimly. The breakaway block is pulling ships from the Dominion home fleet. They've issued orders for families to prepare migration. They want to establish their own protectorate, away from Alliance oversight. Rivers leaned over the table, staring at the glowing symbols. How many ships? Nearly 200, Vines replied. Mostly destroyers and frigates, a few warhammers. Enough to think they can defend themselves. Not enough to survive if the listeners target them. Rivers' jaw tightened. He wanted to let them go. He wanted to let arrogance burn itself out. But he knew Stephen was right. The abyss would not ignore this weakness. And when the listeners struck, the deserters would call for help. And he would answer. He always did. In the medbay, Stephen sat quietly with stevebot standing beside him. The construct's eyes glowed faintly, its chest humming with a low, steady rhythm. Stephen studied it with weary eyes, his voice soft. You'll be me one day. I can feel it. Every surge takes more out of me. One day I won't get back up. Rivers entered, his expression grim. He had heard the words, though Stephen hadn't meant for him to. You're not done yet, Rivers said firmly. And I'll carry this war on your shoulders until the day you decide you're done. Not before. Stephen gave a faint smile, though it didn't reach his tired eyes. The listeners don't care who carries it. They'll come for us all the same. As if to prove his words, the alarms began to blare. The bridge lit red with warning glyphs. Seems detected. Not near Sentinel. Not near Earth. But in the space where the deserters had fled. The abyss had smelled weakness. And it had struck. The night cycle aboard the Razee 2 was quiet. Her decks dimmed to a soft glow. The hum of engines a steady lullaby through steel. Buck Rivers stood in his quarters at the broad viewport, watching Sentinel turn slowly beneath them. The planet glowed with its halo nets, radiant arcs pulsing faintly as though the living world were breathing. Beyond it stretched the void, starfields endless and dark, and somewhere out there the abyss waited. He felt it like a weight in his chest. The Dominion deserters had already drawn away, banners lowered, seats abandoned in the chamber. They were moving ships, families, building the skeleton of a protectorate on the edge of contested space. Every instinct told him the abyss would smell it like blood in the water. And when it struck, those same deserters would cry out for help. He heard the soft hiss of the door and didn't need to turn. He knew her step. Isabella moved into the room with the same poise she carried on the bridge, but here it was different. No sharpness, no iron posture, only the presence of someone who had walked through fire with him and carried the same scars. She slipped beside him, close enough for her shoulder to brush his arm, both of them staring at the dark together. They're going to be hit, Rivers said quietly. His voice carried the certainty of storm. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. The abyss won't ignore a weakness that large. Isabella nodded, her eyes reflecting the halo glow. You're not wrong. Pride draws fire, always has. She was quiet for a moment, then tilted her head slightly toward him. You want me to shadow them? He turned finally, meeting her gaze. Even in the half-light, she was steady, unreadable to most. but to him the truth was clear in her eyes. The Lost Fleet can move cloaked, unseen. They won't trust us enough to ask for protection, but they'll need it. I want your ships just outside their reach, watching, waiting. When the alarms start, you'll be there first. She studied him, searching his face. And Gemini? Close behind, he said. Razee 2, Skuta V, Arclight, Aegis. Ready to fold the second the seams open. I don't want the deserters knowing we're watching them, but I don't want them dying either. Her lips curved faintly, the ghost of a smile. You always were soft for lost causes. He almost smiled in return, almost, but his voice stayed firm. They may be arrogant. They may be foolish. But they're still ours. And I won't let the abyss carve them out of existence while we stand idle. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice until it was just for him. Then you won't be idle. And neither will I. For a moment the war faded away. Just two people, scarred and weary, standing against the stars. Far across the void, the Dominion deserters built their dream of independence. The fleet had pulled nearly 200 ships from Dominion Command, a patchwork of destroyers, frigates, and a handful of warhammers. They gathered around a barren world with a thin atmosphere, its surface already littered with scaffolds and supply convoys. Orbital yards bristled with activity, shields flickered to life, and transports ferried settlers to the surface. Their new commander, Fleet Lord Varric, strode across the bridge of his flagship, banners of crimson draped behind him. His eyes gleamed with pride as he surveyed the work. Look at them, he said to his officers. Free at last. No more council bickering. No more bowing to Rivers and his alliance. Dominion's strength stands alone again. His officers echoed him with nods and murmurs, though not all with conviction. Some eyes flicked to the stars beyond, uneasy. The abyss had left scars on them all, and even the bravest could not forget the silence. Varric ignored their doubt. His voice was thunder, his pride unshakable. The Alliance will regret ever thinking to bind us. We will forge our own path, and Brother itself will see who is strongest when the time comes. But far beyond their shields, cloaked in darkness, 1,000 ships of the Lost Fleet drifted silent, Isabella at their heart. Her eyes never left the deserters' formation, her hands clasped behind her back. He did not speak to them. She did not announce her presence. She simply watched, waiting, knowing the storm was coming. And when it came, she would be there. The alarms flared across the deserters' fledgling protectorate, a scream of red across every deck, a sudden burst of chaos through unfinished comm relays. Seams opened in the void beyond their orbital yards, one after another, silence pouring through like the breath of the abyss. Fleet Lord Varric barked orders, his voice sharp, his pride undiminished. Form the line. Shields to maximum. Prepare the warhammers to fire on my command. But before a single weapon discharged, space rippled and shadows peeled back. The Lost Fleet arrived. 1,000 ships unfolded from cloak in perfect formation, their resonance shields gleaming like auroras against the void. At their heart, Isabella stood aboard her flagship, voice steady as she issued the order to lock the perimeter. The deserters froze in shock, their comm channels erupting with disbelief as they realized the Alliance had been shadowing them all along. The first seam opened fully, the first listener vessel sliding through, its silence beam already crackling to life. Before it could fire, Isabella's voice cut across the fleet-wide comms. All ships fire. The void ignited. Resonance cannons, pulse batteries, and stormfire stitched the silence beam apart. The listener vessel convulsed, split, and vanished in shards of burning alloy. Another seam widened, then another, and the Lost Fleet answered each with crushing force. But the abyss did not come with one ship. It came with many. Over 50 seams opened, and the listeners poured through, ships bristling with stolen weapons, silence lances lashing out to blind the deserters' shields. Warhammers trembled under the onslaught, destroyers broke ranks, frigates fell in burning arcs toward the barren world below. The deserters fought bravely, but without coordination their fleet staggered. And then the sky broke open again. 2 Shadow-class warships ripped free of cloak, their forms vanishing and reappearing in jagged flashes as they flanked the battle. Their firepower roared in every direction, beams ripping listener ships apart in surgical strikes. Behind them, 2 Unity fleets folded in, their paradox formations locking together, massive pulse cannons humming as they charged. The field shifted. For the first time, the listeners reeled. From the Razee 2, Rivers watched it unfold, voice cold steel over the comms. Close the seams. Protect the civilians. Do not let the abyss tear them apart. Gemini fleet jumped in moments later. Skuda V's storm batteries bracing the line, Arclight's shields glowing with resonance fury. The combined fleets hammered the abyss back seam by seam, pulse cannons collapsing the voids as they opened. It was brutal, desperate, and costly, but together they pushed the listeners out. At last the seams closed, silence fading into the background of space. The battlefield hung quiet, ships smoldering, wreckage drifting. On the deserters' flagship, Fleet Lord Varric refused to yield. His voice thundered over the comms. We stood our ground. We showed them Dominion's strength. We do not crawl back to the Alliance like cowards. But his words fell on deaf ears. Transports filled with civilians lit up the comm channels, voices pleading for safety, for return, for a future not built on stubborn pride. Rivers' command relays processed the flood of requests, the ships already vectoring toward Sentinel. Over 80% of the population abandoned Varric's protectorate in a single tide, their vessels streaming back into fold space under Alliance escort. Rivers opened a private channel to Varric, his voice low and final. You've made your choice. When you leave, you don't return. I won't bleed the Alliance dry to save your pride again. Varric's reply was venom, but beneath it ran fear. We'll endure without you. Rivers cut the channel, his expression unreadable as he turned back to the fleet. The civilians were safe. The deserters who stayed had made their choice. The Alliance line reformed, ships gathering, damage tallied, silence fading back into stars. Isabella's voice broke across the calm, quiet but steady. 80% saved. The rest chose their fate. Rivers stood on the bridge of the Razee 2, staring into the dark where the seams had closed. His voice was soft, almost to himself. And the abyss will be waiting for them. The stars gave no answer. Varric's warhammer floated like a wounded beast above the half-built protectorate world. Hull plating was scorched, shields ragged, escorts limping in ragged arcs around the planet. His people had left him, 80% of them carried away under Alliance banners, and what remained clung to him out of loyalty, fear, or sheer refusal to admit failure. He stood on his bridge, voice ringing out like steel. We are still Dominion. We do not crawl back. We rebuild here, stronger than before. His officers nodded, but their eyes betrayed doubt. The world below was no fortress, just scaffold and smoke. The abyss would return, and they all knew it. Varric ignored the whispers, ignored the reports of shortages, ignored the trembling silence left behind by families gone. Alone in his quarters later, he trembled, just for a moment, before forcing his hands still. Pride was all he had left, and he would not let it go. Across the void, cloaked in the dark, Isabella watched. The lost fleet hung invisible around the deserters, 1,000 ships waiting like wolves in the brush. Her hands clasped behind her back, she murmured to her bridge. He's already lost. He just doesn't see it yet. A tight beam to Rivers carried only a few words. They won't last long. The abyss is circling. On Sentinel, the council chamber erupted in chaos. Civilians rescued from Varric's protectorate flooded stations, demanding shelter and stability. Some councillors raged that Dominion pride had cost too many lives. Others shouted that abandoning any people only fed the abyss. Hope finally slammed his fist against the rail, his voice breaking through the storm. Enough. We stand or fall together. Make your choice. All eyes turned to Rivers. He stood silent for a long moment, then said low and final, "We save those who want saving. The rest have chosen their fate. I will not bleed the Alliance for Varric's pride." The chamber fell into a heavy silence. At the far edge of the dais, Stephen lifted his head. His mark glowed faintly, and his voice was soft but carried like a warning bell. Sentinel feels it. The abyss doesn't just break from outside. It breaks from within. And every crack we leave unhealed will be another seam they push through. The council ended with no true resolution, only silence and fear. Outside, the stars burned steady, but everyone in that chamber knew the storm hadn't passed. It had only drawn closer. Rivers stood over the holomap aboard the Razee 2, his expression carved from iron. Isabella's image flickered on the display. her voice steady though the weight of endless vigilance lay behind it. "You ordered me to shadow Buck," she said, her eyes narrowing as she glanced at the shifting marks of Varric's protectorate. "I've kept the Lost Fleet cloaked, watching their borders. They're brittle but proud. It won't take much to break them." Rivers nodded. "Stay in the shadows. They won't ask for help until it's almost too late, and when the seams open you'll already be there." "I'll need more than 1,000 ships if it's heavy," Isabella warned. "You'll have them," Rivers said. His eyes hardened, his voice dropping to something only she could hear. "2 Unity fleets are staged 1 full jump away. 2 shadows ride just outside your perimeter." Her eyes flicked to his. 2 shadows. He didn't correct her. He didn't tell her the truth, for shadows drifted silent in the dark, cloaked so deep even the Lost Fleet didn't know they were there. He had hidden them not from her but from the Council, from anyone who might leak a secret he wasn't ready to show. The abyss arrived without preamble. Seams tore open like claws ripping through night, arcs of silence flooding the void. Listener ships poured through in numbers that dwarfed the last battle. They came with EMP arcs, silence beams, and pulse disruptors stolen from 6 civilizations. The deserters panicked instantly. Warhammers staggered under the pressure, frigates broke formation, and comms screamed with confusion. Isabella didn't wait. She dropped the cloak on the Lost Fleet and surged forward. 1,000 ships lit up at once, cannons blazing into the seams, collapsing the first wave before silence beams could tear apart the Protectorate's shields. But it wasn't enough. The listeners pressed harder, seams opening faster, their beams cutting through Warhammer plating like cloth. 1 vessel shattered in silence, another collapsed in fire. Isabella gritted her teeth, shouting orders, pulling her formation tighter. The Lost Fleet fought with fury, but she could feel it. The line was bending too far. Then the void tore again. 4 shadows appeared at once. They dropped cloak with thunder, their massive forms flaring into existence around the planet and fleet. 1 above, 1 below, 1 to each side, they locked into position in a perfect square. In a breath, they lit their shields and the void exploded with light. A wall of force rose around the entire Protectorate, a globe of shimmering resonance that swallowed the abyss's silence and hurled it back. Silence beams bent and split harmlessly, EMP arcs dissolved against the barrier, and listener ships convulsed in confusion. Then the shadows fired, storm cannons, resonance lances, and pulse batteries tearing into the seams with relentless fury. The field flipped in an instant. Isabella's eyes widened as she realized the truth. Not 2. For Rivers had played the abyss and everyone else alike. He had hidden his strongest hand until the moment it was needed most. Then the Razee 2 arrived. Gemini fleet folded in behind the shield wall, Scuda V at the front, arclight glowing like a star, aegis bristling with fresh power. Their cannons roared into the void, collapsing seam after seam. Unity fleets followed, locking into paradox formation, their resonance cannons unleashing arcs that shattered the listener reinforcements. The battle lasted hours, but the outcome had been decided the moment the shadows revealed themselves. Seam by seam, ship by ship, the abyss was beaten back. When the last void collapsed, the sky lay quiet but for drifting wreckage and the smolder of victory. On Varric's flagship, the bridge was silent. Not with discipline. This silence was heavy with shame. Officers who had once followed his every order now turned their eyes away. At last, his second-in-command stepped forward, voice trembling but resolute. "Fleetlord, no more." 2 others joined him, then a third. One by one, Varric's officers stripped the crimson badges from their uniforms and laid them on the command rail. They did not raise their voices. They did not argue. They simply ended his reign. The comm channel to Rivers opened. The new commander bowed his head low. "We were wrong. The Protectorate cannot stand alone. We asked to rejoin the Alliance in the Dominion. We will serve, but we will not ask for the Council seat we abandoned. We forfeit it. Our loyalty will be proven by action, not words." Rivers and Hope stood side by side aboard the Razee 2, listening in silence. Then Hope spoke, his voice a hammer. "So be it. You are Dominion still, but not Council. Earn your place with deeds." The officers accepted the judgment with bowed heads. In the corner of the comm screen, Varric sat slumped, eyes hollow, lips pressed tight. He did not speak. He did not move. Pride had carried him into fire, and now it left him with nothing. The channel closed. Rivers turned to Hope and Isabella, who had arrived on the command rail. His voice was quiet but certain. The fracture is sealed for now. But the abyss won't stop here. And when it comes again, it won't care about seats or councils. The three of them stood in silence, watching the void. The shadows drifted back into cloak, their massive shields fading into nothing, waiting for the next storm. The alarms began at once. Sentinel's holomap erupted in crimson, seams flaring open across multiple systems. Not a probing strike, not a test. This was the abyss unleashing its full weight. Earth, Cryon, Illyria. 3 worlds at once. Silence poured into every system, seams clawing wide, listener fleets sliding through in torrents. It was the largest assault the galaxy had seen since the Watcher War, and the intent was clear. Crush the Alliance where it lived. The council chamber broke into shouts before the first orders had even left the Razee 2. They'll be overwhelmed. Earth cannot hold. Cryon's nets will collapse. Rivers didn't argue. He simply gave the command. The void tore again. From deep cloak, 6 new shadows emerged. One after another they appeared, enormous hulls shimmering as their resonance shields unfolded like wings. Their arrival silenced even the Dominion envoys who had once before demanded proof of Alliance strength. But it wasn't just the shadows. Each one was flanked by its own Unity fleet, 12 ships per shadow, 3 full paradox formations locking into position as their massive pulse cannons hummed to life. Isabella's voice carried across the command channel, taut with shock. "Buck, how many more have you been hiding?" Rivers stood on the bridge of the Razee 2, his expression calm but his eyes fierce. "Enough to keep us alive." Then the Razee 2 changed. Conduits lit across her decks, glowing with power. AI matrices hummed to life in her core, connecting to resonance links that extended far beyond her own hull. On every shadow in every Unity vessel, lights flickered in unison. Crews froze as their consoles came alive with commands they hadn't entered, displays aligning, formations locking tight. Rivers turned to his officers, his voice low but steady. "The system is live. Razee 2 holds the key." The AI system pulsed through the shadows, each vessel responding to Rivers' commands as though they were extensions of his own flagship. They still had skeleton crews aboard, but the heavy lifting, the maneuvering, the weapons synchronization, the shields, was all integrated through Razee 2's control core. For the first time, the Alliance had more than fleets. It had a single mind guiding multiple arms of war. "Deploy them," Rivers ordered. In Earth's orbit, 4 shadows descended in silence, locking into a shield wall around the planet. Their Unity fleets formed behind them, paradox formations ready to fire. The first listener silence beam shattered harmlessly against the layered shields, and then the cannons fired, resonance, pulse, and stormfire in a single devastating chord. At Cryon, the nets flickered under pressure, but 3 shadows folded in above them, their shields reinforcing the failing grid. Paradox cannons pulsed, collapsing seams before listener vessels could emerge fully. The tide turned instantly. At Illyria, where silence had begun to seep into the planet's atmosphere, the sky suddenly lit with the glow of 3 shadows and their escorts. They dropped shields like a dome, sealing the world from harm, then struck back with fire so bright it split the darkness apart. On the Razee 2, Rivers stood at the command rail, hands steady on the controls. The shadows moved as he willed them, shields locking, cannons firing in perfect unison. It was like conducting a symphony, one hand guiding fleets across 3 different battlefields at once. Hope stared, his massive frame looming over the tactical deck. "You control them," he said slowly, awe and unease in his voice. "Every shadow, every Unity fleet, through you." Rivers didn't look away from the holomap. They were built with cores that could link to Razee 2. Crews can operate them, but when the time comes, they answer to one voice. They were never meant to be scattered toys for council squabbles. They're weapons of survival. And they'll fight as one. The holomap pulsed as seam after seam collapsed. At Earth, the skies cleared. At Cryon, the abyss retreated. At Illyria, the silence broke. For the first time, the Alliance didn't just endure. It struck back. When the battles ended, the council chamber was silent. Even the Dominion envoys who had railed against Rivers' power sat pale and speechless. The Razee 2 had commanded 9 shadows. 9 unity fleets. 3 worlds had stood against annihilation and won. But in the silence, Steven spoke softly from the edge of the chamber, his mark glowing faint. They won't stop now. You've hurt them. They'll gather again. Stronger. And when they return, it won't be for worlds. All eyes turned toward him. Steven's voice was steady, though his face was pale. It'll be for Brother. And Sentinel itself. The battle reports faded from the holomap one by one, the crimson warnings dissolving into calm blue arcs. For now, the skies over Earth, Cryon, and Illyria were clear. The seams had closed. The listeners were driven back. But no one aboard the Razee 2 celebrated. Later that evening, Rivers sat in his private chamber, the weight of command still heavy across his shoulders. The room was dim, a low glow casting the steel walls in amber. A single table stretched before him, not covered in tactical holos or battle reports, but with the remnants of dinner. Wine half finished. Bread torn but not eaten. Plates cooling where no one had appetite. Isabella sat across from him, posture composed but eyes tired, her dark hair spilling loose across her shoulders. Beside her, Steven leaned back in his chair, pale but steady, his mark glowing faintly beneath the sleeve of his tunic. For a rare moment, there was no council, no fleets, no war. Just 3 people who had carried the weight of too many worlds for too long. Rivers finally broke the silence. His voice was quiet, but it cut the air like steel. "Steven," he said, "tell me straight. How many more shadows do we need? How many unity fleets before we're safe?" Steven closed his eyes for a moment, as though listening to something far beyond the chamber. The glow of his mark pulsed in rhythm, slow and deliberate. When he opened them, his gaze was clear, sharp, certain. 4 for each world, he said. That's the number Sentinel gives me. For shadows. 4 unity fleets. Enough to cover every major world, every stronghold. Anything less and seams will break through. The words hung heavy in the chamber. Isabella leaned forward, resting her arms against the table, her voice steady and certain. Then we build them. I'll return to the Shield planet. The Forges will start new unity fleets at once. They know what's coming. They'll work until their hands bleed if it means the walls hold. Rivers exhaled slowly, then nodded once. He turned, opening the secure channel only a handful in the galaxy even knew existed. The shadowed glyph of the hidden dock flared to life. "This is Fleet Admiral Rivers," he said, his voice low but resolute. "Begin construction of 20 more Shadow-class warships immediately. Full cloaks, upgraded resonance cores, integration for remote AI command. No delays. No excuses." The reply came back clipped and mechanical. "Acknowledged. 20 shadows. Commencing construction." The channel cut, leaving the room in silence once more. Rivers looked between Steven and Isabella, his expression unreadable. "We may never be able to strike the abyss directly. We may never find where they hide, or what lies beyond those seams. But if we can make them pay for every opening, if we can cause enough destruction to every ship, every weapon, every attempt to breach us, maybe they'll think twice." Steven's eyes flickered with weary honesty. "They won't." Isabella reached across the table, resting her hand over Rivers. "But we'll still make them bleed." Rivers tightened his grip around hers, his voice steady as stone. "Then let's bleed them dry." The glow from Steven's mark brightened, casting shadows across the chamber like embers of an unseen fire. The war wasn't over. It had only begun to sharpen. Stay tuned and subscribe to find out what falls on the Alliance next.